Chapter 124 to 126. King Arthur, King Arthur, King Arthur, King Arthur. Amidst the cheers of the knights, Shirou turned around and headed back to the mansion. Dealing with the next task would be easy. He could just leave it to Hector to dismiss the knights. In other words, the most effective use of these knights was not to rely on their personal loyalty, but rather to use them to spread Shirou's deeds and quickly enhance his prestige. Let the people of Britain know that King Arthur has appeared. Although Shirou had no experience as a king, he felt that he had to do this, even though he couldn't fully explain why. This was likely because of his status as a transmigrator from the modern era. He understood the power of public opinion like the back of his hand. Shirou entered the mansion and Artoria looked at him with a puzzled expression, seemingly wanting to speak but hesitating. "What's on your mind?" Shirou asked with a smile. "If you have something to say, don't be so formal with me. My king, I don't understand. Why did you have to confront them? And when you drew your sword, was it a threat? If so, why didn't those knights resist?" she asked, looking puzzled. The most perplexing thing for her about this sudden event was why a threatening gesture would make people admire and cheer instead of react with anger or fear. Based on what she had learned and understood, Artoria believed that making a threat would only cause people to lose respect and dislike you. "I've mentioned it before, but please, there's no need to call me king in private," he said with a helpless smile. "If it were up to you, how would you have dealt with the situation?" Without hesitation, she responded, "I would have simply ignored them. Whether you pay attention to them or not shouldn't affect your chances of becoming king." "That approach wouldn't be effective," he replied thoughtfully. "Even though I've never held the title of king, I understand that a king cannot afford to lose face. A leader who isn't respected won't be able to lead anyone. If I ask in return, how would you have managed the situation if you were in my position?" Artoria took a moment to contemplate before responding earnestly. "I would start by reasoning with them. If they refused to listen, I would confront them individually, facing each one in combat until they were completely convinced." Kay found Artoria's response to be very reasonable and couldn't help but nod in agreement. Meanwhile, Merlin simply smiled but didn't say anything. Both reasoning with them and engaging in combat could indeed be considered valid options. Shirou agreed, nodding in understanding. Artoria's eyes sparkled as if she had received acknowledgement from someone she deeply admired. Excitedly, she asked, "So, do you believe my approach is viable?" "It is certainly viable, but don't you think the efficiency might be too low?" he asked in response. "Huh." Her expression shifted to one of surprise and confusion. "In this world, there isn't necessarily a fundamentally incorrect method," Shirou explained thoughtfully. "The distinction lies in whether the method is suitable, efficient, and whether the cost and actions align with one's personal values and the values of the public." He continued, "Some individuals can be swayed through reasoning while others may prove resistant. Even those who are generally reasonable might become unreasonable in certain circumstances. And conversely, those who are typically difficult to reason with might display reasonability in other scenarios. The world is constantly changing, and as individuals dealing with various situations, we must adapt to these ever-changing dynamics. Embracing change paves the way to success, whereas remaining stagnant leads to failure." Artoria appeared to be completely bewildered by his words. Kay also appeared to be completely confused, and only Merlin remained calm with a slight smile on his face. Shirou attempted to explain further, but after weighing his options, he realized that the full meaning of his words couldn't be conveyed in Old British, and his Old British language skills were not strong enough to fully express himself. All he could say was, "You'll have to interpret it for yourselves." "I understand." She nodded earnestly, her expression serious. Shirou headed back to his room. At this point, his room was no longer the small, shabby quarters he had originally been given. Instead, it was a spacious room that wasn't much different from Kay's. After defeating Merlin and farming in his dreams, Kay and Hector had quickly arranged for Shirou to have a new room. Sitting on the soft bed, Shirou heaved a deep sigh. To be honest, he hadn't felt too nervous when he was rallying the knights earlier during the Fourth Holy Grail War. His small mortal world had been destroyed and decimated by Iskandar's vast world of conquest, without any mercy. It was this experience that gave him the bravery to pursue his goals. It was also the reason why he was able to create the Sin City. To lead people, one must possess courage. In truth, even though it had been extremely painful and distressing at the time, and he had harbored hatred towards everyone, when he finally emerged from that vicious cycle, he had experienced boundless freedom. The Fourth Holy Grail War had brought him countless blessings, so he was deeply grateful to everyone he had met during that time. In his view, he had no enemies or opponents during that war, only teachers and friends. Just then, someone opened the door and Merlin walked into the room. "Why have you come to find me, Merlin the Great Swindler?" Shirou asked with a raised eyebrow, teasing Merlin. "Hey now, what do you mean, Merlin the Great Swindler? Am I really that kind of person?" Merlin protested, a look of annoyance crossing his face. "I came to see you because I'm quite curious. Is this truly your first time being a king?" Merlin inquired. Shirou laughed and said, "Guessed Merlin ... This was a sentence that Merlin typically directed at others, but now someone had turned the tables on him. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. It's true that I lack experience as a king, Shirou admitted. Merlin looked confused and asked, "Then why do you seem so experienced?" "Because I've seen how other kings handle things," he explained. "I may not be a king, and no one has formally taught me how to act like one, but I learned by observing." Shirou thought back to the kings he had encountered during the Fourth Holy Grail War, Iskandar, Gilgamesh, and even Artoria herself. Before crossing over into this world, Shirou had read several historical novels, including Romance of the Three Kingdoms, as well as books on farming and agriculture. Most importantly, his high school history books had covered the rulers of various nations and their policies within their historical contexts. The books presented their backgrounds, effects, and influences in a memorization-based format that made it easy for students to remember. As the saying goes, having read countless poems, one can chant even if unable to compose. Shirou may not have been a king, but with so many examples and cases stored in his mind, couldn't he learn and adapt? He was just an ordinary person, and the flame he possessed was just an ordinary flame. Lacking innate wisdom, he could only learn and explore in the same way as any other ordinary person. There was nothing more to it than that. Is that so? Well, you truly are an interesting individual, Merlin chuckled. You came all this way just to ask me that nonsense. Merlin smiled and replied, I'm not that bored, of course. The question was merely incidental. Actually, Hector is the one who's looking for you, and I'm just doing him a favor. He's waiting for you in the living room. I see. As expected, Shirou said, rising from his seat. Don't you find it surprising if someone else took over the throne that he had raised his daughter for and didn't come to find me? That would be rather strange, wouldn't it? Shirou chuckled. The most critical factor is that he's a nobleman. Shirou walked out of his room. You truly are an interesting person, Fujimaru Shirou, Merlin mused, squinting his eyes. I wouldn't want to miss the chance to observe your fascinating nature, so I'll keep an eye on you for as long as I can. Shirou arrived at the hall of the mansion, where he found only Hector standing alone. Good day, Sir Hector. Were you looking for me? Shirou greeted him before walking into the hall. As Shirou entered the hall, Hector looked at him with a complex expression. It was still hard for him to believe what had just happened. The young boy he had found a year ago, who shared a name with King Leodogrance's daughter Guinevere, had just pulled the sword from the stone. This shattered King Uther's plan of 15 years and took the throne away from his foster daughter Artoria. Hector took a deep breath and composed himself before turning to Shirou and asking, Shall I address you as King or Guinevere? Guinevere will do for now. I am simply taking Artoria's place temporarily, and I will return the throne to her as soon as I can. The future is unpredictable, and it's possible that you might be tempted by the throne at some point. Sighed Hector. However, King Arthur and his throne hold no interest for me. All I truly want is to return to my home. Please don't worry, Sir Hector, Shirou reassured him. The beauty of Britain pales in comparison to the small pond in my hometown. I have no aspirations to be king or to rule. So you can rest assured, I understand that the future is unpredictable, and I don't think it would be productive for us to discuss it further, Hector acknowledged. Instead, I simply want to ask whether, should you become king, you would be willing to give Kai an important role. This was Hector's primary concern. Regardless of any oaths or loyalties, the undeniable truth was that he was a nobleman who had to consider his own interests and the future prospects of his son. This was the very reason why Hector had agreed to foster Artoria when Uther had proposed it to him. Uther had promised him benefits in return. Above all else, what was most crucial to Hector was that his family would continue to thrive and prosper once Artoria, his foster daughter, ascended the throne. This would depend on her remembering their gratitude for all that she had received from them. However, the unforeseen outcome was that Shirou had pulled the Caliborn and Artoria had shown no intention of reclaiming the throne. What was more important now was that Shirou had demonstrated the cunning and intelligence of a true king. This forced Hector to reassess his betting strategy, taking into consideration Shirou's current attitude towards the throne. In the current situation, it might not necessarily be required to have King Arthur on the throne. After all, Uther had been dead for many years, and his influence, though still present, was not enough to intimidate the other kings. As a result, any of the northern kings had a chance to take Uther's place, particularly the three kings who were originally allied with him and had the possibility of assuming his position. Despite this, the threats posed by foreign forces such as Vortigern, the Saxons, and the Picts continued to loom large. The northern kings needed a strong and capable leader to preside over the situation. Currently, the Camelot Kingdom, supported by Merlin, still served as the backbone of the region. However, the political climate was very turbulent, and any slight carelessness could result in being replaced by another contender. Given this situation, it was inevitable that the nobles would begin placing their bets and investments in one contender or another. Hector was also a nobleman, and he could not escape the need to make a decision on where to place his own bets. Shirou responded, If I do become king, and Kay is willing to assist me, I cannot promise him the highest position. That would be hypocritical and insincere, and I'm sure you wouldn't believe me even if I did. Nevertheless, I can assure you that I will certainly place Kay in a position that is appropriate for him. I understand, Hector replied, his expression giving away little as to whether he was satisfied or dissatisfied with the response he had received. Hector finally spoke. The sword has been pulled from the stone. According to Uther's plan, Sir Owain will be arriving in a few days to discuss your coronation with you. He is the master of ceremonies, so you should prepare yourself accordingly. Thank you. There is one more thing I would like to mention, Hector added. During your temporary reign, Kay will become your knight. This is not because I want to gain anything from you, but rather because Britain has been longing for a strong leader for over a decade now. I truly hope that you succeed. Thank you for your counsel, Sir Hector. With a nod, Shirou turned and left the hall, leaving Hector to his own thoughts. Am I right or wrong, Uther? Hector murmured to himself, his face reflecting his confusion. Days passed by like this. Other than the fact that the servants in the estate were becoming more and more respectful towards him, there seemed to be no difference from usual. Although things may have seemed unchanged, Shirou couldn't help but notice a few noticeable differences. For one, there was a daily crowd of knights and town residents who would surround the estate, shouting and asking to see him. If he didn't know any better, he would think he had done something terrible. To address this, Shirou took it upon himself to not only offer comfort and encouragement to the townspeople, but also deliver impassioned speeches denouncing Vortigern's treacherous behavior, promoting his own ideals, and rallying support by wielding the caliber. By this point, there wasn't a soul in town who didn't know the name Arthur. No matter where Shirou went, he was greeted by the sound of people shouting his name. Artoria believed that this was the epitome of an ideal king. According to the normal succession process, Shirou should have waited for Sir Owain to arrive and then followed him to Camelot to assume the throne without having to go through so much trouble. However, Shirou did not follow the normal procedure and instead took the initiative to build up his reputation. By the time Sir Owain arrived, Shirou had already rallied the majority of the townspeople to his cause. Although there were those who didn't agree with Shirou, most people had been won over by his cause. Even those who didn't share his views didn't dare to stir up trouble in the face of the overwhelming support for him. Every single day, Shirou delivered captivating speeches that never failed to inspire those around him. Initially, his words held great power and moved people deeply. However, as time went on, his speeches continued to resonate, even among those who had heard them before. Surprisingly, the listeners remained fully engaged and inspired, their spirits rejuvenated with youthful vitality and a renewed sense of hope. This was something Merlin couldn't help but envy. Merlin had to admit, Shirou's way with words was truly remarkable. While he couldn't help but be impressed by Shirou's abilities, there was also a small twinge of jealousy that crept into Merlin's thoughts. For Shirou, however, this was all just par for the course. Though he still felt a little nervous when speaking in public, he was no longer afraid to do so. However, when it came to being crowned king and doing all that a ruler should, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of hesitation. After all, this was his first time being a king, and the situation that Britain was facing could hardly be described as optimistic. It was an incredibly difficult time to be taking on such a role. In some ways, the challenge of being crowned king was similar to that of participating in the Fourth Holy Grail War. The difference was that while the Holy Grail War tested an individual's combat strength and personal strategy, the struggle for the throne tested one's leadership and comprehensive qualities. He had graduated from the Fourth Holy Grail War, but in terms of the struggle for the throne, he was a complete novice. The key difference was Shirou's mentality. During the Fourth Holy Grail War, he had only thought of running away and had resorted to self-deception and unsavory tactics. However, now that he was faced with the upcoming war for the throne, he made the active choice to confront it head-on. This was a sign of growth on Shirou's part. In addition, Artoria had been displaying some peculiar behavior lately. Though she remained a loyal guardian to him, she frequently retrieved a notebook from her pocket and diligently jotted down something while observing him. It was a behavior that he found somewhat intriguing, curiosity getting the better of him. Shirou eventually asked Artoria what she was documenting. In response, she replied, "I am taking notes on the ways of a king's life and learning from them." Shirou nodded, feeling relieved. As he embarked on the road to becoming a king, he recognized that he was still a novice and had much to learn. He might not be able to mentor others just yet, but he had many examples to draw from and could use them as templates in his own leadership. While she was eager to learn from him, Shirou didn't mind sharing all of his experiences with her. However, the challenge was that translating everything into Old British was not only time-consuming, but there was also a risk that the translation might not be accurate. It was probably best for Artoria to learn on her own, at her own pace. In fact, the best way to handle the translation of these cases would be to use Merlin to connect their dreams and communicate through mental dialogue, which would eliminate the language barrier altogether. However, at this point, Merlin's dream connection was much less advanced than it would be 1,500 years later when Scathach invaded his dream. The mental strain of doing this every day was too high, and it left him feeling as if he was being possessed by a ghost. It was an exhausting experience. As a result, Shirou was hesitant to allow Merlin to invade his dreams unless it was absolutely necessary. Days continued to pass in much the same way, until one fateful night when a group of cavalry in armor suddenly charged into the town. Upon hearing this news, Shirou realized that Shirou had finally arrived. Merlin instructed him to meet with Shirou at the town hall in the town the following day. Shirou nodded calmly and accepted the news without any resistance. As the successor, he was going to meet the minister instead of the other way around. It seemed a bit amusing, but that was simply the way things were. Until the new king took power, the minister held a dominant position. However, once the successor was crowned, they would become the dominant figure. As the world changes, so to do people's positions, and it's important to be adaptable in order to succeed. The following morning, Shirou dressed in a formal knight's attire that Hector had helped to prepare. As he looked at himself in the bronze mirror, dressed in a silvery armor with a white cloak, he couldn't help but feel as though he resembled a young knight from the medieval era. However, there was one thing that continued to bother Shirou: his hair. As he looked at his black locks, which had grown past his ears, he couldn't help but sigh. In ancient Britain, there were no scissors, let alone professional hairdressers. Haircuts were typically done by cutting with a knife, which wasn't very safe. That's why Shirou had neglected his hair. Shirou couldn't help but think that if his mother saw his long hair, she would probably give him a good spanking, just like she used to when he was a child. Once he had finished dressing, he looked considerably more formal. He picked up Caliborn and walked out the door. As he stepped outside, he saw that Hector, Merlin, and others had been waiting for him for some time. He nodded to them before the group set out towards the town. Hector likely supported Merlin's strategy and agreed that Shirou should temporarily act as the king. For the past few days, he had been telling Shirou about Shirou. According to Hector, Shirou was once one of King Uther's closest knights and was also one of the executors of the ideal king plan. Along with Sir Baldwin and Sir Brastias, he was one of the 3 major ministers and one of the 3 pillars that upheld the kingdom of Camelot after King Uther's passing. Sir Brastias took charge of border defense and military affairs, ensuring the safety and protection of Camelot's borders. On the other hand, Sir Baldwin held the responsibility of managing the court, overseeing its operations and administration. Working alongside them was Owain, who served as the master of ceremonies, effectively managing the internal affairs of Camelot. Together they formed a competent team that ensured the smooth functioning of the kingdom. As per King Uther's plan, once Artoria pulled the sword from the stone, Sir Owain was to rush from Camelot and escort her back to Camelot for her coronation. Hector had described Sir Owain as having a mild personality and being fiercely loyal to King Uther. However, Shirou couldn't help but feel a little wary of the man. His description made him sound like an old fox. It's true that people can change, and while Sir Owain was once very loyal to King Uther, it had been many years since his passing. As the master of ceremonies, Sir Owain had held power for quite some time, and there was a chance that he might have become corrupt. It was difficult to say for certain. The only way to know for sure would be to meet Sir Owain in person and assess the situation firsthand. Shirou wasn't worried about his own safety. He had accumulated a year's worth of magical energy, and even though he wasn't as powerful as he once was, he was still a servant who was beyond the limits of normal magical energy. He was more than capable of dealing with the knights of the end of the Age of Gods with ease. He was only concerned with what Merlin had warned him about. He worried that if he mishandled the matter and caused internal strife in Camelot, then Vortigern would break through the northern defense line and unify Britain. Not only would he be unable to return home, but Britain would also be devastated. It was true that Merlin had a talent for spinning lies, which made Shirou feel quite worried. He was caught in a dilemma. On one hand, he strongly suspected that Merlin was fooling him, but on the other hand, he knew that he had to take what Merlin said seriously. It was a difficult position to be in. Despite his concerns, Shirou knew that he could only take things one step at a time. He had to face Sir Owain and assess the situation before he could make any decisions or take any actions. As Shirou led his group into the town, he couldn't help but notice how different it was from their previous visits. This time, people had formed a welcoming team and were cheering loudly for Shirou from the city gate. "King Arthur! King Arthur! King Arthur! King Arthur!" The people shouted with all their might, creating an overwhelming uproar that echoed throughout the town. The overwhelming response from the people was a direct result of Shirou's efforts over the past few days. He had worked hard to inspire and bring hope to the people for a better future. It was a reminder that as a leader, it wasn't enough to simply work hard. One must also be able to inspire and rally others to their cause. It was unlikely that many people would be willing to stand behind a silent and uncommunicative leader. Even if someone were initially willing, after being together for a long time, they might begin to describe the leader as difficult to get along with and eventually leave. A leader needed to be able to communicate effectively and inspire their followers to work towards a shared vision. In response to the loud cheers from the people of the town, Shirou said nothing, but simply raised Caliburn high above his head, a symbol of hope and leadership to the people. With just this one action, the people became even more excited, and their shouts grew even louder. Shirou's actions had responded to the people's desire for a better future and had given them hope. He had become the symbol of their aspirations and the one who would lead them towards a better tomorrow. This was momentum, the beginning of a movement towards a brighter future. He understood that if he were unable to respond to people's expectations for a better future, The momentum he had created would eventually swallow him like a huge wave. He was well aware of Artoria's ultimate fate, which was a cautionary tale of a leader who, despite responding to people's expectations, was unable to satisfy their aspirations for a better future. She had pulled out the Caliborn, defeated Vortigern, and yet, in the end, she was spurned and hated by the very people she had fought to protect. She had been unbeaten throughout her life, but her ultimate fate had been a tragic one. This proves one thing. The sword is a double-edged weapon. Being a king is more challenging and entails greater responsibilities than simply being a warrior. However, this time he won't escape as he did during his involvement in the Fourth Holy Grail War. Whether or not he is aware of the challenge, he will find a way to overcome it. If the task is difficult, he will diligently brainstorm for solutions. Even if it becomes stressful, he will grit his teeth and persevere until he gets through it. Face it head on. This is growth. Arthur is truly dazzling. Morgan stood in the crowd, gazing at the Caliborn as it glimmered in the sunlight, unable to resist squinting. "Mother, are we going to join them?" Gawain asked from the side. "No, we will not," she replied. "But why not?" Gawain persisted. Morgan hesitated for a moment before responding, "Because this Arthur has black hair, and I'm not entirely convinced that he is truly my brother." Shirou strode confidently down the town's main road, which led straight to the central town hall. He held his head high and his chest out, exuding an air of self-assurance as he approached the central town hall. He noticed a group of knights already waiting for him. They were impeccably dressed, and their leader was a friendly-looking middle-aged man with a bit of extra weight. Hector sidled up to Shirou and whispered in his ear, "That portly fellow over there is Sir Owain." Shirou gave a subtle nod and focused his gaze on Sir Owain, studying him closely while keeping his own emotions hidden. Sir Owain greeted them with a friendly smile that made Shirou feel at ease, but he couldn't help feeling cautious. In his experience, people who appeared affable and held high positions were often the most challenging to deal with. Nevertheless, Shirou remained guarded and kept his wariness hidden. Shirou glanced over his shoulder to check the expressions of the people standing behind him. He ignored Artoria and Kay since they were unfamiliar with Sir Owain. Instead, he focused on Hector and Merlin, studying their expressions carefully, with a particular interest in Merlin's reactions. He cast a few extra glances at the latter. Hector's expression appeared neutral, but Merlin's face was alight with a smile that resembled that of an audience member watching an exciting drama. Merlin noticed Shirou's gaze and touched his own face, asking, "Why are you staring at me, my King Arthur?" Shirou grinned and replied, "Nothing in particular. Just admiring the beauty of Magus Merlin." Although he lacked clairvoyance, Shirou had a sense of what was going on just by observing Merlin's expression. Merlin's playful smile hinted that he had picked up on something significant. Shirou had a feeling that this meeting was not going to be a straightforward one, so he kept his guard up, preparing himself for whatever might come his way. The group arrived in front of Sir Owain, who was waiting for them. Rather than addressing Shirou right away, Sir Owain's attention was drawn to Hector and he greeted him with a beaming smile. "Sir Hector, it's been 10 years since we last met in the royal city. Look at me, I've put on some weight." Sir Owain playfully patted his belly and grinned at Hector. Shirou raised an eyebrow, wondering if this was some sort of joke. Artoria noticed his reaction and furrowed her brow, taking a step closer to him. Hector squinted slightly before offering a reassuring smile to Shirou. "My king, Sir Owain and I go way back. He's just happy to see an old friend and got a bit carried away." Shirou couldn't help but wonder if they were playing some sort of political prank on him. He cast a casual glance at Merlin, who continued to wear a smile on his face. After a moment of thought, he spoke up. "I understand completely. Sir Owain was so happy to see an old friend that he forgot to greet me. It's understandable to get caught up in the moment." Shirou subtly acknowledged Sir Owain's blunder and graciously gave him an out. Sir Owain apologized profusely. "I'm terribly sorry. How rude of me. I completely forgot where I was." Sir Owain then greeted Shirou with sincere respect and a friendly smile, asking, "You're the successor who pulled the sword from the stone, aren't you?" He didn't directly answer Sir Owain's question, but instead replied, "I am Arthur, the son of Uther Pendragon." Sir Owain's smile widened, and he raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Your name is ringing throughout the land. Successor, the people know that you, as the son of Uther Pendragon, are the embodiment of the British Red Dragon, destined to defeat the White Dragon." He gestured towards the cheering crowd as if to emphasize his point. He nodded and returned Sir Owain's smile. "Indeed, I am Arthur, the destined king, and the son of Uther Pendragon. I was born to defeat the White Dragon and bring a bright future to all of Britain, which is why my name resonates throughout the land." Sir Owain squinted his eyes and carefully looked at Shirou before saying with a smile, Indeed. When the former King Uther passed away, he said something along those lines." Shirou hoisted the sword he had pulled from the stone high and turned towards the people, his voice ringing out with conviction. "I, Arthur, am the son of the late King Uther Pendragon, the destined king, and the one born to defeat the White Dragon and bring a bright future to all of Britain." The people of the town were filled with excitement. "King Arthur, King Arthur, King Arthur, King Arthur." The people erupted in cheers, their excitement palpable. Shirou's words had struck a chord in their hearts, even though they knew little about the White Dragon. All they wanted was a stable and prosperous future. Shirou turned back towards Sir Owain and smiled at him, asking Sir Owain, "You will surely help me achieve this great feat, won't you?" Of course, Sir Owain returned Shirou's smile with one of his own. However, he couldn't help but feel suspicious as he quickly glanced over at Merlin, only to find that the Magus had turned his head away and was staring off in another direction, revealing only his side profile to Sir Owain. Sir Owain couldn't help but wonder to himself, what has that guy been teaching him? Moreover, Sir Owain couldn't help but wonder why Shirou's hair had turned black when he pulled the sword at the age of 15, even though it had been golden when he was taken away at the age of 5. Had he undergone some kind of drastic transformation? Although Sir Owain had heard of people undergoing drastic changes, he had never heard of anyone changing their gender. It couldn't be possible, it must be an illusion cast by Merlin. Sir Owain understood immediately, and couldn't help but glance at Merlin again, thinking, he really is Merlin. I didn't even notice it was an illusion. But why didn't he tell me beforehand? Did he want to embarrass me? Please follow me. Successor. Sir Owain instructed the knights to clear a path and then led Shirou towards the town hall. Shirou followed with a smile and spoke up. No need to be so formal, Sir Owain. I understand that you were the guardian knight of my late father, King Uther, and that you're also my uncle. Please feel free to call me Arthur. Sir Owain's gaze flickered as he looked at Shirou's smiling face. He couldn't help but think that Shirou was quite tricky. Despite his tender age of 15, Shirou displayed a surprising level of worldly wisdom. Initially, Sir Owain had assumed that Shirou would be easy to handle due to his youth, but now he realized his mistake in underestimating him. This kind of cunning, it was truly befitting of the son of Uther Pendragon. However, Sir Owain knew that being cunning alone was not enough to become a king. As Shirou and Sir Owain walked towards the town hall, they both wore refreshing smiles on their faces while engaging in conversation. Artoria felt increasingly uncomfortable as she watched the two men's cheerful expressions. And even Kay shared in her discomfort. As he observed Shirou and Sir Yelphus conversing, Kay experienced a strange sensation. It didn't feel like two people were chatting and laughing, but rather two foxes playing chess or two snakes in a standoff. Despite the tension, the atmosphere remained peaceful. Kay stole another glance at Artoria, who stood upright like a lily, and he couldn't help but release a sigh of relief. If Artoria were in the same situation, she would have unsheathed her sword and attacked someone by now. Even Hector had to concede that Shirou was a more suitable temporary king than the current Artoria. Amidst the cheers of the people, the group entered the town hall. Once inside the hall, Shirou discreetly scanned the room, his gaze eventually settling on a middle-aged knight donning red armor. He couldn't help but take notice of the middle-aged knight who exuded a commanding presence similar to Hector's even among a group of knights. This individual could not be ignored. Upon catching sight of the middle-aged knight, Hector, who had previously been at ease, couldn't help but be taken aback and blurt out, how did you get here, Brestius?" Shirou cast a knowing glance at Hector. This middle-aged knight was none other than Sir Brestius, a legacy left by Uther before his passing and the current Minister of Military Affairs. Sir Brestius calmly turned his head and regarded Hector. The caliburn has been drawn, and the successor who inherited Uther's will has emerged. As the Minister of Military Affairs, it is only appropriate for me to come and assess the so-called successor's capabilities and determine if he has the capacity to bear the weight of Britain's future. Hector's brow furrowed deeply in concern. This turn of events was not foreseen in the ideal king plan, as only Owain was meant to receive Arthur here. Consequently, Hector did not anticipate Sir Brestius, the Minister of Military Affairs, to be present as well. Owain was a shrewd and composed individual who, even if he disagreed with the successor, wouldn't make things too difficult. This was precisely why Uther had appointed him as the Minister of Ceremonies. However, Sir Brestius was an entirely different character. As the Minister of Military Affairs, he possessed a fiery temperament. When King Tathagal of Cornwall rebelled against Uther, Brestius didn't even wait for Uther's command before leading 150 cavalrymen into Cornwall, where he decapitated Tathagal and presented his head to Uther. And at that time, Uther's order had just been issued. Since Uther's passing, it could be argued that Sir Brestius had become one of the primary reasons why the various kings coveted but dared not act against Camelot. Now that Sir Brestius was present, the situation had taken a turn for the worse. It was apparent that if Shirou failed to earn his approval as the successor, he would be deemed unfit to lead. If Shirou angered Brestius, he was likely to attack and kill him on the spot. The suddenness of the situation was overwhelming, catching even Hector off guard. Hector shot a glance at Merlin, only to find him smiling. A surge of anger rose within him. Having worked alongside Merlin for many years, Hector was aware of the power of Merlin's foresight. It was evident that Merlin had been aware of Sir Brestius's presence all along but had chosen to keep it hidden. Judging whether this was good or bad according to human standards was futile since Merlin was not human. The standards that applied to humans did not necessarily apply to him. Despite everything, Uther's evaluation of Merlin lingered in Hector's mind. He understood that Merlin was not human and could carry out both good and evil acts for humanity. This was not out of malicious intention, but because he was a non-human entity observing human affairs. "Don't mess with Brastias, Guinevere," Hector secretly said to himself. Shirou took notice of the expressions of those around him, directing his attention towards Sir Ewain and Merlin beside him. Sir Ewain maintained a flawless smile on his face, revealing no emotions, whereas Merlin seemed deeply intrigued by the situation. Merlin's lack of effort to conceal his emotions provided Shirou with a reference point for the situation. It was evident that Sir Brastias was the root of Merlin's entertainment, as he had been detected by his clairvoyance. Brastias strode over and peered down at Shirou with contempt, sneering. "I had hoped that the Red Dragon of Britain, the so-called ideal king that His Majesty spoke of, would be someone of remarkable stature. Yet it appears that he is nothing but a mere shrimp." Shirou raised his head slightly, gazing directly at Brastias with a cold expression, and questioned, "As a knight of the late king, are you ridiculing me for my height?" "Isn't that the case?" Brastias retorted. The atmosphere became tense, and the situation was fraught with danger. Artoria furrowed her brows, taking a small step forward to stand behind Shirou. For a knight, their honor was intricately tied to the honor of their lord. Any dishonor or disgrace brought upon a knight reflected poorly on their lord as well. Shirou locked eyes with Brastias for a moment before letting out a laugh and speaking seriously. "Listen here, Sir Brastias, while I admit that I may be shorter than you, if you continue to mock me for it, I will use this sword to sever your head so that you won't be able to insult me again." The atmosphere grew even more tense in an instant.